After 34 years of being the invisible daughter, I finally got my parents' full attention. It arrived in a thick envelope delivered to my desk at 8 in the morning. They were not suing me for money. They were suing me for a body part. My sister needed a kidney, and my refusal apparently violated some unwritten family contract. I looked at the subpoena and realized love was just a transaction I could no longer afford. My name is Mara Whitfield, and for 34 years, I have existed in the periphery of my own life. I live in Lakeburn, Ohio, a town that prides itself on manicured lawns and the kind of aggressive politeness that masks deep-seated judgment. My apartment is quiet. It is a sanctuary of beige walls and silence that I bought with my own money, earned from my position as a lead researcher at Northway Biomedical Analytics. My job is sterile and precise. I deal in data, in absolutes, and in facts that cannot be altered by a mother's tears or a father's disappointment. It is the exact opposite of the house I grew up in. To the outside world, the Whitfields are a pillar of the community. My father is a deacon, and my mother heads the charity committee. And then there is Lydia. My younger sister is 2 years my junior and the sun around which my parents orbit. Lydia was the golden child, the miracle, the fragile princess who needed constant adoration. I was the spare part. I learned very early on that the best way to survive in that house was to make myself small. If I was quiet enough, they would forget I was there, and I would be spared the criticism that I was not enough like Lydia. I remember my 25th birthday. I had just received a promotion, a significant leap in my career that came with a 15% raise. I had booked a table at a nice restaurant, foolishly hoping that perhaps this time my achievement would warrant a toast. We were seated for 10 minutes when Lydia called. She had broken a nail, literally chipped a manicured nail before a date, and was crying hysterically. My mother did not even look at me. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and signaled my father. "We have to go," she had said, her voice trembling with a worry reserved only for my sister. "Lydia is in distress." "But I ordered the cake," I had whispered, the words tasting like ash. My father had looked at me with that familiar mix of impatience and disdain. "Mara, honestly, your sister needs us. Do not be so selfish." They left me there with a table full of food and a bill for $200 that I paid alone. That was the night I stopped expecting anything. I stopped inviting them to award ceremonies. I stopped telling them about my life. I built walls of indifference so high that I thought nothing could hurt me again. The only crack in that wall had been my Uncle Julian. He was my mother's brother, the black sheep of the family because he refused to play their games. He was the only one who ever looked at me and actually saw me. When I was 16 and crying in the garage because my parents had forgotten to pick me up from swim practice for the 3rd time that month, he had sat beside me on the cold concrete. "You have a spine of steel, Mara," he had told me, his voice rough with cigarette smoke and kindness. "They don't see it because they are blinded by their own reflections in Lydia. But one day that steel will be the only thing standing. Julian died 4 years ago, when I passed. The last tether connecting me to any sense of familial warmth severed completely. I grieved him in silence because my mother made his funeral about how much she was suffering. Since then, I have been drifting, maintaining a polite, hollow distance from my parents. We spoke on holidays. We exchanged brief, superficial texts. I thought we had reached a détente, a cold peace where they ignored me and I pretended not to care. But peace is fragile when it is built on denial. It was a Tuesday night, exactly 12:45 in the morning. When the illusion shattered, I was asleep, the heavy, dreamless sleep of the exhausted, when my phone began to buzz against the nightstand. The screen lit up the dark room with a harsh, white glare. "Mother." I stared at the name. My mother never called me. She only called if she needed me to do something for Lydia that she could not do herself. A knot of dread, cold and heavy, formed in my stomach. I swiped the answer button and brought the phone to my ear, my voice thick with sleep. "Hello, Mara. You need to come to Silverline Medical Center immediately." My mother's voice came through, sharp and devoid of any preamble. There was no greeting, no apology for the hour. "What, Mom? It is almost 1 o'clock in the morning. What is going on?" There was a pause on the other end, a beat of silence that felt loaded with a terrifying significance. When she spoke again, her voice cracked, not with sorrow for me, but with terrified desperation for her masterpiece. "It's Lydia," she said. "Her kidneys are failing. The doctors say she doesn't have much time." The fluorescent lights of Silverline Medical Center hummed with a frequency that seemed to drill directly into my skull. It was 2 in the morning. The private waiting room was furnished with plush leather chairs and abstract art that cost more than my car, designed to make tragedy feel upscale. My parents were already there, pacing the expensive carpet like caged animals. When I walked in, my mother did not hug me. She grabbed my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong, her nails digging into my skin. "Thank God," she breathed, her eyes wide and manic. "Dr. Vance is waiting." She dragged me into the private suite. Lydia was lying in the hospital bed, hooked up to a constellation of beeping machines. She looked pale, fragile, like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and glued back together. But when her eyes opened and landed on me, I didn't see fear. I saw expectation. It was the look of a child who sees a present and knows, without a doubt, that it belongs to her. Dr. Vance, a tall man with silver hair and a soothing, practiced baritone, stood by the window. He turned as we entered, holding a tablet. "Mara," he said, nodding. He didn't ask how I was. He went straight to the biology. "We have stabilized Lydia for the moment, but her kidney function is below 8%. Dialysis is a temporary stopgap. She needs a transplant. Given the rarity of her tissue type and the urgency, a living donor is her only real option for a quality life." My father stepped forward, his voice booming with authority. "And Mara is the match. We know the siblings are the best bet. We need to get the paperwork started immediately." It was not a question. It was a command. Dr. Vance looked at me, then back at my father. "Statistically, yes. A sibling offers the highest chance of compatibility. We would need to run the specific cross-matching tests tonight to confirm." "But do it," my mother interrupted, wiping a tear that had not yet fallen. "Test her now. Schedule the surgery for as soon as the results come back. We cannot waste another hour." I stood frozen near the door. They were discussing my body, my internal organs, as if I were a spare parts inventory in a warehouse. No one had looked at me. No one had asked me. I felt a sudden, violent wave of nausea. "Wait," I said. The word came out quiet, but in that stifling room, it sounded like a gunshot. My parents turned slowly. My mother looked confused, as if the furniture had suddenly started speaking. "What do you mean?" "Wait," my father asked, his brow furrowing. "I mean, wait," I repeated, my voice trembling slightly. "I just walked in the door. You are talking about major surgery. You are talking about taking an organ out of my body. I need a moment. I need to think about this." The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother's face shifted from confusion to horror, and then to a cold, hard anger. "Think about it," she whispered, the volume low, but the intensity screaming. "Your sister is lying there dying, and you need to think about it." "What is there to think about, Mara? She is family. I am family too," I said, though I felt less like a daughter and more like a livestock animal. "And it is my kidney. Whatever the tests say, it is still inside me." Do I not get a say? Lydia made a small, pained noise from the bed. "Mom, Dad, please, don't fight. If Mara doesn't want to help me, if she thinks I'm not worth it..." It was a masterstroke. She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't have to. The guilt weaponized instantly in the room. "Look at her," my father snapped, gesturing wildly at the bed. "She has her whole life ahead of her. She has dreams. Mara, you have always been the strong one. You are healthy. You can live perfectly fine with one kidney. Why are you being so difficult? Is this about that birthday dinner 5 years ago? Are you really that petty?" "It is not about dinner," I said, backing up until my spine hit the cold wall. "It is about the fact that you haven't asked me. You told the doctor to prep me like I'm a cadaver. We didn't think we had to ask." My mother cried out, throwing her hands up. "We thought you loved your sister. We thought you were a good person." Dr. Vance cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable for the first time. "We do need the potential donor's informed consent before we proceed with any testing, or she consents," my father said, cutting him off. His eyes locked on mine with a terrifying intensity. "She is just in shock. She will do the right thing. Mara knows her duty." I looked at them, my father's red face, my mother's accusatory tears, and Lydia's silent, hungry stare. They didn't see me. They saw a resource. They saw a solution to their problem. For the first time in my life, I realized that my value to them was entirely calculated by what I could subtract from myself to make them whole. "I am not signing anything tonight," I said, my voice shaking but my feet planted firm. "I am going home. I will let you know. If you walk out that door," my mother hissed, stepping into my personal space. "Do not think you are just walking away from a hospital. You are walking away from us." I turned the handle, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "I know," I whispered to the empty corridor, and then I walked out. The following morning, I made an appointment with a nephrologist 3 towns over, a man named Dr. Eris, who had no connection to the Silverline Medical Center or my family's social circle. I needed facts that were not tainted by my parents' influence. I sat in his sterile office, listening to the hum of the air conditioner, while he laid out the reality of what my parents called a simple gift. "It is a major surgery." "Mara," Dr. Eris said, leaning forward with his hands clasped. "Recovery time is roughly 6 weeks. There are risks of infection, hemorrhage, and reactions to anesthesia. And long-term, while most donors live healthy lives, you are left with reduced kidney mass. If you ever develop hypertension or diabetes, your risks complicate significantly. You need to be absolutely sure." I nodded, staring at the plastic model of a kidney on his desk. It looked so small, so removable. "And if I don't, if I say no," he looked at me over his glasses, "then you keep your organ, and you live with the consequences of that choice. But medically, you are under no obligation to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm." I left his office and drove to a small park by the lake, sitting in my car as the rain began to streak the windshield. My mind drifted back, unbidden, to the catalog of things I had already surrendered to Lydia. When I was 10, I gave up my larger bedroom because Lydia said the morning light in hers hurt her sensitive eyes. When I was 18, I withdrew my application to a prestigious art program in New York because my parents said they could not afford 2 out-of-state tuitions, and Lydia had already been accepted to a private liberal arts college in Vermont. I stayed in state. I worked 2 jobs. I never complained. That night, the nightmares started. I dreamt I was lying on a banquet table, unable to move. My father was carving pieces of me off like a holiday turkey, placing them onto Lydia's plate. She was eating smiling, her cheeks rosy with my blood. I woke up gasping, my hand clutching my side where the scar would be. My skin felt cold, but the phantom pain was searing. I needed to say it out loud. I met my best friend, Chloe, at a diner on the edge of town. Chloe was the only person who knew the full extent of the Whitfield family dynamic. She watched me tear a paper napkin into tiny shreds. "They are acting like I am a monster for hesitating," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Mom sent me 3 texts this morning. One was a Bible verse about sacrifice. The other 2 were pictures of Lydia hooked up to the dialysis machine. Chloe reached across the table and stopped my hand from destroying the napkin. Mara, look at me. Do you want to do this? Forget them? Forget Lydia? Do you want to undergo surgery? I don't know. I feel like I'm supposed to want to. That is not an answer, Chloe said, her voice hard. That is conditioning. They trained you to be the spare tire. You sit in the trunk until the main wheel goes flat. But you are a person. Mara, you are not an auto part. If I say no, they will never forgive me. They don't forgive you now for existing, Chloe countered. They just tolerate you because you are useful. What happens when you run out of parts? To give her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I took out my notebook and a pen. I started to write a list. I titled it, Things I Have Given. My 10th birthday party canceled because Lydia had the flu. My first car given to Lydia because hers broke down and she needed it for safety. My self-esteem. My voice. The list went on, covering 2 pages. I stared at the ink, realizing that for 3 decades, I had been slowly cannibalized by my own family. They had taken my time, my money, and my confidence. Now, they wanted my flesh. This wasn't about saving a life. If it were just about saving a life, they would be on the National Registry list, looking for any donor. This was about my life. This was about the final submission. If I gave them this, there would be nothing left of Mara Whitfield. I would just be the vessel that kept Lydia alive. I closed the notebook. The decision settled over me, not with a burst of joy, but with the heavy, cold clarity of a judge banging a gavel. I am not going to do it, I said. Chloe squeezed my hand. Are you sure I am sure? I replied, and for the first time in days, my hands stopped shaking. I am done being the spare. My parents had staged the dinner like a victory lap. There was roast beef, the good china, and a bottle of expensive red wine breathing on the sideboard. Lydia sat at the head of the table, looking pale but smug, like a visiting dignitary receiving tribute. The air in the dining room was thick with assumed compliance. They did not ask if I was ready. They simply asked when I could take off work, assuming my schedule was as malleable as my self-worth. I put my fork down. The metal clinking against the porcelain was the only sound in the room, sharp and intrusive. I looked at the 3 of them, the triumvirate that had dictated my reality for 34 years. I am not going to do it, I said. My voice was steady, a flat line against the cheerful domestic backdrop. My mother froze, the gravy boat suspended in mid-air over her potatoes. She blinked, a slow, confused movement. Excuse me, I thought you said. I must have misheard you. I said I am not donating my kidney, I repeated, looking directly at my father. I have thought about it. I have consulted with my own doctors, and the answer is no. For 10 seconds, the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Then, the explosion came. My father slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump and the wine glasses shudder. This isn't a choice, Mara, he roared, his face flushing a deep, dangerous red. This is your sister. She is dying, and you are sitting there. You are sitting there hoarding your body like it is some kind of prize. What is wrong with you? It is my body, I said calmly, anchoring my hands to my lap to stop them from trembling. It is the only thing I actually own. I am not willing to undergo a major surgery that puts my future health at risk. We gave you that body, my mother screamed, abandoning the gravy boat to clutch at her chest as if I had physically struck her. We fed you. We clothed you. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. We paid for your braces. We paid for your piano lessons. Do you know how much we sacrificed? And now, when we ask for one thing in return, you turn your back on us. One thing I asked, raising an eyebrow. You want an organ. You want to harvest me? That is not borrowing a cup of sugar. Mom, and as for the rest, that is what parents are supposed to do. You don't get to trade basic parenting for my kidney. Lydia had not said a word. She sat there, trembling, but her eyes were dry. She looked at me not with sadness, but with a pure, distilled hatred. It was the look of a child who had been told Santa Claus was not coming, mixed with the malice of an adult who knows exactly where to twist the knife. You are jealous, Lydia whispered. Her voice was weak, but the venom was potent. You have always been jealous of me. You want me to die, don't you? You think if I am gone, they will finally love you. You think you will finally be the favorite. Lydia. Stop, I said, feeling a cold detachment settle over me. It was liberating, this numbness. This isn't about love. It is about survival. I am not cutting myself open to fix a problem I didn't cause. And I am not going to apologize for wanting to stay whole. You are dead to me. My father spat, standing up and pointing a shaking finger at my face. If you walk out of here without agreeing to this surgery, do not bother coming back. You are no daughter of mine. A daughter protects her family. You are just a stranger, a selfish, cold-hearted stranger. I think I have been a stranger in this house for a long time. I replied. I stood up. I didn't touch my food. I didn't offer a tissue to my mother, who was now sobbing into her napkin about how she had failed to raise a Christian woman. The bridge was not just burning. It had disintegrated into ash. Get out, my father hissed, his voice dropping to a low, terrifying growl. Get out of my house before I throw you out. With pleasure, I said. I walked to the door, the sounds of my mother's weeping and my father's cursing following me like a storm cloud. I didn't look back at Lydia. I knew what I would see the golden child, tarnished for the first time by the word no. I stepped out into the cool night air, and for the first time in my life, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt safe. I got into my car and drove away, leaving the perfect family to choke on their own rage. 3 days after the dinner, the war moved from the dining room to the legal system. It happened at 10 in the morning on a Tuesday. I was compiling a data set on viral transmission rates when the receptionist buzzed me. Her voice was tight. A man was waiting in the lobby. I went down, expecting a courier. Instead, a stranger in a rumpled suit shoved a thick manila envelope into my chest. Mara Whitfield, he asked, his tone bored and bureaucratic. Yes, you have been served. I opened the packet right there in the lobby, under the gaze of the security guard. The header was bold and black. Plaintiffs Robert and Ellen Whitfield, defendant Mara Whitfield. The lawsuit was not for a kidney directly, as no court could order that. Instead, they were suing me for intentional infliction of emotional distress. They were claiming financial restitution for breach of implied contract, citing the years of financial support they had provided me during my childhood as a loan, not a gift. They were demanding $250,000 in damages for the mental anguish my refusal had caused the family. My hands shook so hard I dropped the papers. It was absurd. It was legally baseless. But as I stared at the legal jargon, I realized it was not about winning in court. It was about destroying me in public. By noon, the story had leaked. A reporter from the Lakeburn Chronicle called my office line. Ms. Whitfield, the reporter said, her voice dripping with faux concern. We received a tip about a civil suit involving your refusal to save your dying sister. Do you have a comment on the allegations that you are abandoning your family in their hour of need? I have no comment, I stammered, my heart hammering against my ribs. I slammed the phone down. The silence in the office became deafening. Colleagues who usually stopped to chat about weekend plans now averted their eyes when I walked to the break room. I heard whispers near the coffee machine. I heard she is letting her sister die. Someone hissed from behind the partition. That is cold. Who does that? I retreated to my cubicle, feeling the walls closing in. My phone pinged. It was a notification from social media. I had blocked my family, but a mutual friend had sent me a screenshot of Lydia's latest post. It was a photo of her in the hospital bed, looking frail and angelic, with a caption that read, "Some people choose themselves over family. It hurts more than the disease. Pray for me as I fight this alone." The comments were a landslide of sympathy for her and vitriol for the unnamed monster sister. How could she sleep at night? One comment read, "Selfishness is a disease too." Read another. My parents had cut off all direct contact. There were no more texts, no more calls. They had outsourced their communication to a law firm and the court of public opinion. They were burning my reputation to the ground to coerce me into submission. They thought the shame would break me. They thought that if they made my life outside the hospital unbearable, I would crawl back to the operating table just to make it stop. I sat in my car in the parking lot at 5 in the evening, watching the rain blur the world outside. I looked at the courthouse summons on the passenger seat. I could run. I could move to another state, change my name, and disappear. No, I said aloud to the empty car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I am not the one who should be ashamed. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of a lawyer I had found online. A woman known for taking cases that other attorneys were too polite to touch. I was done hiding. If they wanted a court battle, I would give them one. I would not just defend myself. I would put the whole ugly truth on the record. Catherine Thorne's office was not located in a glass tower. It was in a converted brownstone that smelled of old paper and aggressive coffee. She was a woman of about 60, with hair cut into a sharp bob that suggested she did not have time for nonsense. She threw my parents' lawsuit onto her desk with a heavy thud that echoed in the small room. "It is a shakedown, Mara," Catherine said, leaning back in her leather chair and crossing her arms. "Legally, it is a mess. They are arguing that raising a child constitutes a binding financial contract. If a judge allowed this to proceed, every parent in America would be suing their kids for diaper costs, but they do not want to win." "They want to break you." "They are doing a good job," I admitted, staring at the file. "The whole town looks at me like I am a murderer." "Let them look," Catherine replied, her voice cool and detached. "We look at the facts, and the facts here are interesting." She slid a stack of documents toward me. These were the medical records we had subpoenaed from Silverline Medical Center during the discovery phase. Catherine pointed to a timeline she had drawn up in red ink. "Your parents claim the emergency arose 3 weeks ago. They claim it was a sudden, catastrophic failure requiring immediate intervention. But look at the blood work from 6 months ago." I looked at the numbers. My medical knowledge was research-based rather than clinical, but even I could see the trend lines clearly. Her levels were declining steadily. I said, a cold realization washing over me. They knew 6 months ago that she would need a transplant. "Exactly," Catherine said. "They waited until her condition was critical to tell you. Why? To maximize the pressure. To create a crisis where you would not have time to think. That is not medical necessity. That is entrapment." We spent the next 4 hours dissecting the depositions. My father claimed in his sworn statement that he had approached me gently and given me ample time. My mother claimed in hers that I had initially agreed and then backed out to hurt them maliciously. They could not even coordinate their lies. "I have emails," I said, pulling out my laptop. "I have emails from college. Them telling me I had to decline a scholarship so I could come home and drive Lydia to her physical therapy. Them telling me I had to pay for her car repairs because she was too fragile to work. Send me everything," Catherine said, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. "We are going to build a profile of systemic coercion." The real turning point, however, came 2 days later. I was at my apartment, sorting through a box of old tax returns to prove my financial independence. when my phone rang. The number was local but unfamiliar. "Hello, is this Mara Whitfield?" The voice was older, raspy, but vaguely familiar. "Yes." "Who is this?" "This is Sarah Higgins. I don't know if you remember me. I was the night nurse for your grandmother when she lived with you, 12 years ago." I sat down on the floor, the tax forms crumpling under my hand. "I remember you. Sarah, you used to sneak me cookies when my parents sent me to bed without dinner." "I saw the news," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "I saw what they are doing to you, and I couldn't sit still. I remember how they treated you, Mara. I remember what they said when they thought no one was listening." "What do you mean I heard them talking one night?" Sarah continued, and I could hear her taking a deep breath on the other end. "About the trust fund your grandmother set up. They convinced her to change it. They told her you were mentally unstable, that the money had to go to Lydia for safekeeping. They stole your future years ago, honey, and I am willing to say that to a judge." Tears pricked my eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of validation. For decades, I had thought I was crazy. I thought I was just imagining the cruelty because I was jealous. But here was a witness, a ghost from the past, proving that the monster was real. "Sarah," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "would you meet with my lawyer? Just tell me when." She replied. I hung up the phone and looked around my quiet apartment. The fear that had been strangling me for weeks began to loosen. My parents had money. They had public sympathy. They had the loud, weeping narrative of a dying daughter. But I had something they had forgotten to account for in their calculations. I had the truth. And for the first time in my life, I was going to use it not to defend myself, but to strike back. Catherine Thorne summoned me to her office at 7 in the morning on a Thursday. The sky outside was a bruised purple, heavy with an impending storm, matching the atmosphere inside the room. She did not offer me coffee this time. Instead, she pointed to a single sheet of paper resting in the center of her mahogany desk. "We got the full communication logs from the transplant coordinator," Catherine said, her voice dangerously low. "Read the entry from February 14th. I picked up the paper. My hands were steady, a surprising change from the trembling mess I had been weeks ago. I read the clinical notes typed in stark, unfeeling black font. Potential donor match identified. Deceased donor, male, age 22. Tissue compatibility 98%. Logistics donor organ located in Boston. Transport time 4 hours. My eyes scanned down to the decision field. Offer declined by patient's medical proxy. Father. Reason logistical inconvenience and preference for living-related donor. I looked up at Catherine, the air leaving my lungs in a sharp rush. They found a kidney. 4 months ago, they found a match. Not just a match, Catherine said, leaning forward. A near-perfect match. And your father turned it down because... Wait for it. He didn't want to fly to Boston. That cannot be true, I whispered, feeling a wave of nausea. He said it was life or death. He said I was the only option. Catherine slid a second document toward me. It was a printout of an email chain between my father and my mother, dated the same day they rejected the Boston kidney. The subject line was simply financials. I read the highlighted text. If we take the Boston offer, we have to pay for the chartered transport and the out-of-network surgical team. That is roughly $12,000 that insurance won't cover. If we get Mara to do it, everything is in-network, zero cost. Plus, I spoke to the pastor about the fundraiser. A sister-saving-sister story sells better than a cadaver donation. We could raise enough to cover the mortgage for a year. I dropped the paper as if it were burning my skin. The room went silent. But inside my head, there was a deafening crash. The pedestal I had placed my family on, even the damaged, cracked pedestal of recent years, disintegrated into dust. They hadn't just sued me. They had gambled with Lydia's life to save $12,000 and pay off their house. I was not a daughter. I was not even a savior. I was a coupon. I was a marketing strategy for a GoFundMe campaign. They didn't want a kidney, I said, my voice sounding hollow and strange to my own ears. They wanted a story, and they wanted it for free. Precisely, Catherine said. We leaked this to the Lakeburn Chronicle an hour ago. The article just went live. She turned her laptop screen toward me. The headline was bold and brutal. Did local family reject life-saving organ to save? Cash leaked emails reveal shocking gambit in kidney lawsuit. The tide turned so fast it was dizzying. By noon, the local news vans that had been parked outside my apartment building relocated to my parents' driveway. The reporters who had shoved microphones in my face asking why I was so selfish were now shouting questions at my father about the Boston donor. My phone, which had been a source of terror for weeks, began to buzz with different notifications. People were apologizing. Strangers who had sent me hate mail were deleting their comments. But I felt no vindication. I felt a cold, hard clarity. I watched a clip on the news of my mother trying to shield her face from the cameras, her perfect family mask slipping to reveal the panic underneath. For the first time in 34 years, I did not feel the urge to protect her. I did not feel the reflex to jump in and fix it. You did this to yourselves, I said to the screen, my voice steady. The fear was gone. They had stripped me of my privacy, my reputation, and my peace. But in doing so, they had accidentally stripped away the one thing that gave them power over me, my desire for their approval. I looked at the lawsuit paperwork on my kitchen counter, the threat that had once terrified me, and I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a soldier who realizes the enemy has just walked into a minefield. I picked up my phone and called Catherine. Are we ready for the hearing next week? I asked. We are, she replied. Are you? I have never been more ready, I said. Let's finish this. The Redmont County Court was suffocatingly warm, the air thick with the scent of floor wax and nervous sweat. My parents sat at the plaintiff's table, dressed in muted tones of navy and gray, looking every bit the grieving, betrayed parents. Lydia was absent, a strategic emptiness left to remind the jury of the stakes. Their lawyer, a man named Sterling who wore a suit that cost more than my car, paced before the bench, his voice trembling with manufactured outrage. Your Honor, Sterling boomed, gesturing toward my parents. We are looking at a family destroyed not by disease, but by the cold-hearted abandonment of a daughter who has forgotten her roots. This is not just about a kidney. It is about the emotional devastation inflicted by Ms. Whitfield's cruel game of hope and withdrawal. When it was my turn to take the stand, the walk felt miles long. I swore the oath, my hand resting on the Bible, and sat down. I did not look at my parents. I looked at the jury. Catherine stood up, her demeanor calm and surgical. Mara, why did you refuse the donation? It was never a choice, I said, my voice steady, cutting through the humidity of the room. For my entire life, I was not treated as a daughter. I was treated as an asset, a spare tire. I gave up my college fund for Lydia's tuition. I gave up my weekends for her errands. When they asked for my kidney, they didn't ask me. They told the doctors to prep me. They viewed my body as property they had a lien on. A heavy silence settled over the room. My mother let out a theatrical sob, burying her face in a handkerchief. Objection, Sterling shouted. Relevance. We are litigating emotional distress, not childhood grievances. Overruled, the judge said, leaning forward. Go on, Ms. Whitfield. I took a breath. I refused because I realized that if I gave this, there would be nothing left of me, and they would still ask for more. Catherine nodded and turned to the back of the room. Defense calls Sarah Higgins to the stand. My parents froze. My father's head snapped around so fast I thought I heard his neck crack. Sarah walked in, leaning on a cane, her face lined with age but her eyes sharp as flint. She took the stand and identified herself as my grandmother's former live-in nurse. "Mrs. Higgins," Catherine asked, holding up a sworn affidavit. "You were present in the Whitfield home in the year 2010. "Correct, I was," Sarah replied, her voice raspy. "Did you witness a conversation between the plaintiffs and the late Mrs. Margaret Whitfield regarding Mara's inheritance?" "I did," Sarah said, looking directly at my father. "It was 3 days before Margaret passed. She wanted to leave half her estate to Mara, a trust fund. About $100,000. The courtroom gasped. My father stood up halfway, his face purple. "This is a lie. Sit down. Mr. Whitfield," the bailiff barked. Sarah continued. "Unbothered. Robert and Ellen told Margaret that Mara was mentally unstable. They said she was on drugs. They lied to a dying woman to get her to change the will so everything went to Lydia. They said Mara didn't deserve it because she was just the backup. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum where all the air had been sucked out by the truth. My mother had stopped crying. She was staring at the table, pale as a sheet. Catherine handed a document to the judge. "We have the amended will, dated 2 days before death, and the nurse's log noting the conversation. This establishes a pattern of financial predation and emotional manipulation dating back 15 years. Judge Vance, a stern man with wire-rimmed glasses, picked up the document. He read it slowly. Then he picked up the email evidence regarding the rejected Boston kidney from the previous day's discovery. He looked at my parents for a long, uncomfortable minute. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, his voice quiet but carrying a weight that crushed the room. "Are you telling me that your clients, who are suing for emotional distress, defrauded their own daughter out of an inheritance and then rejected a viable organ donor to save $12,000? Sterling stammered, shuffling his papers. "Your Honor, those are allegations that they are not allegations." The judge interrupted, holding up the nurse's log. "They are sworn testimony corroborated by documentation. I have heard enough." I looked at my parents. They were shrinking in their seats. The mask of the grieving, perfect family had slipped completely, revealing the greed and rot beneath. For the first time, they looked small, and I felt giant. Judge Vance slammed his gavel down with a sound that felt like a guillotine severing the past from the future. The noise made my mother jump, her hands clutching her purse as if it contained the last remnants of her dignity. "This court finds the plaintiff's claims not only without merit but bordering on a malicious abuse of the judicial process," Judge Vance said, his voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "You came here claiming emotional distress. Yet the evidence suggests you are the architects of your own misery. Case dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am ordering the plaintiffs to pay the defendant's legal fees in the total amount of $18,000. He paused, looking over his wire-rimmed spectacles at my parents, who were now shrinking into their chairs. "I suggest you look inward, Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield. You came here seeking equity, but you have shown none. This family does not need a judgment. It needs a conscience." The courtroom erupted into a low buzz of whispers. Reporters were already typing furiously on their phones. My parents stood up, their faces pale and drawn. For the first time, there was no crowd of supporters rushing to comfort them. The revelation about the Boston kidney had done its work. Even the most sympathetic onlookers had recoiled. Lydia, safe in her hospital bed miles away, was no longer the tragic heroine. She was now the beneficiary of a fraud. I gathered my purse and walked toward the exit. I expected to feel triumphant. I expected a surge of adrenaline, a desire to pump my fist in the air. Instead, I felt a profound, exhausting quiet. It was the feeling of a storm finally passing, leaving behind a landscape that was scoured clean but empty. I was halfway down the marble corridor when I heard the rapid clicking of heels behind me. Mara. Wait, I stopped but did not turn around immediately. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and then slowly pivoted. My parents were rushing toward me, not with the arrogance they had worn for weeks, but with a frantic, terrified energy. My father looked 10 years older than he had that morning. My mother's eyes were red and swollen. "Mara, please," my mother gasped, reaching out a hand but stopping short of touching me. "We need to talk, not as opponents, as a family." "Family," I repeated, the word tasting like copper in my mouth. "You just tried to sue me for $250,000. You tried to destroy my career. You lied to a judge. We were desperate," my father said, his voice cracking. "You have to understand. We were scared. Lydia is sick. Fear makes people do crazy things. We didn't mean for it to go this far. We just wanted you to realize the gravity of the situation. You rejected a kidney." I said simply, "You rejected a perfectly good kidney from Boston because you wanted to save money and sell a sob story. That wasn't fear. Dad, that was accounting." My mother let out a small and strangled sound. "We can fix this. We can issue a statement together. We can tell the press it was all a misunderstanding. Please, Mara, if you walk away now, everyone will think we are monsters. Lydia needs you. We need you." I looked at them, really looked at them, for the first time in years. I searched for the anger that had sustained me through the sleepless nights and the humiliating headlines. I searched for the rage that had made me hire Catherine and dig up the past. It was gone. In its place was a vast, cool indifference. I realized then that they were not apologizing because they were sorry. They were apologizing because they had lost. They were terrified of the social exile that was waiting for them outside the courthouse doors. They wanted me to come back, not because they loved me, but because my presence would validate them again. I was still just a tool to them, a shield against public opinion. "I am not angry anymore," I said, and I saw a flicker of hope in my mother's eyes. "Oh, thank God," she breathed. So you'll come to dinner. We can talk about the next steps, no," I said gently. "You misunderstand. I am not angry because to be angry, I would have to care, and I don't care anymore. You broke it. All of it. Mara." "Don't say that," my father whispered, stepping back as if I had slapped him. "We are your parents." "I know," I replied, "and that is the saddest part of this whole story." I turned my back on them. I heard my mother call my name, her voice rising in a panic that bordered on hysteria. "Mara. You can't just leave Mara." I kept walking. The heavy double doors of the courthouse pushed open, and the bright, blinding light of the afternoon sun hit my face. I stepped out onto the sidewalk, leaving the cool shadows of the law and the suffocating weight of the Whitfield name behind me. I was alone, but for the first time in 34 years, I was not lonely. 2 weeks after the verdict, I sat in Catherine's office for the last time. The document in front of me was not a lawsuit, but a formal cease and desist, alongside a restraining order that legally codified the distance I had already placed between myself and the Whitfields. I signed my name with a flourish I had never possessed before. The ink was black and permanent, marking the end of a 34-year contract of servitude. Catherine capped her pen and looked at me across the desk. The storm outside had cleared, leaving a sharp, bright autumn day in its wake. "You know they are still trying to appeal to the public," Catherine said, her voice soft. "Your father gave an interview to a local radio station yesterday. He said he forgives you. He called it a tragedy of miscommunication." I laughed, but it was a light, airy sound. It carried no weight. He can call it whatever he wants. He can tell the world I am the villain. He can write a book about it. As long as he stays 500 feet away from me, I do not care, and Lydia Catherine asked. I paused. I thought about my sister, lying in that hospital bed, waiting for a kidney that she had tried to steal rather than ask for. I thought about the Boston donor she had rejected because the logistics were too inconvenient. I hope she finds a donor. I said honestly, I hope she lives a long life, but she will have to do it without my parts, and she will have to do it without my guilt. I left the office and drove straight to my apartment. I did not pack everything. I left the furniture. I left the old clothes that reminded me of the woman who used to apologize for taking up space. I packed 2 suitcases, my laptop, and the box of photos from my grandmother. I walked through the empty rooms one last time. The silence was not heavy, it was expansive. It felt like a blank canvas waiting for paint. My phone rang as I walked to the door. It was a number from a major television network. They had been calling for days, offering me $5,000 for an exclusive interview. They wanted the tears. They wanted the drama. They wanted me to sit on a beige couch and explain how it felt to be sued by your own mother. I declined the call and blocked the number. I was done being a spectacle. I was done explaining myself to people who viewed my life as entertainment. The truth had been told in court, and that was enough. I carried my bags down to the car. The lease on my apartment was broken. My resignation at Northway Biomedical Analytics had been submitted and accepted. I had secured a new position at a research lab in Denver, a city where no one knew the name Whitfield, and where the mountains were tall enough to block out the noise of Lakeburn, Ohio. As I started the engine, I looked at the rearview mirror. I half expected to see them there, my father shouting, my mother weeping, Lydia staring with those hungry eyes. But the street was empty. They were not powerful monsters. They were just people who had made a bad bet and lost. I realized then that the lawsuit had not been a curse. It had been the greatest gift they could have given me. If they had just asked nicely, if they had manipulated me with love instead of legal threats. I might have caved. I might have given in to the old programming. But by pushing me into a corner, they had forced me to find my teeth. They had forced me to realize that my life was not an extension of theirs. I put the car in drive. I did not look at the courthouse as I passed it. I did not look at the hospital on the hill. I kept my eyes on the highway stretching out before me, a gray ribbon leading to a future that belonged entirely to me. Goodbye, I whispered to the wind rushing past my window. I turned up the radio and pressed the accelerator. I was 34 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was actually born. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on my decision. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Victoria Revenge Stories, hit the like button, and smash that hype button to help this video reach more people who need to hear it.